Hi guys, Lucky Luke here. The more I coach, the more I work on training videos and do my one-to-one sessions, the more I come to realize that while detailed hand history review, I think will always be the backbone of the work I do, it's always one of the best ways to get an insight into a player's game. I think a lot of my students are really kind of crying out for a themed approach to study. It's so easy in MTTs to have blind spots, to have leaks which we don't always unearth in a straightforward review, and conceptual mistakes which slow us down in our study or which lead us astray. So this year in my one-to-one work, I've actually been overhauling my approach with a lot of students and looking at themed study from the bottom to the top, if you like, from the simplest, most mathematical kind of focused pre-flop stuff, push fold, for example, all the way up through 3-bet shoving spots, 3-betting deeper stacked, 4-betting ranges deeper stacked pre-flop, post-flop analysis, raising flops. But what this has all been really leading up to is a desire on my part really to create a detailed primer on how to beat MTTs, which will take us from the beginning all the way through to the more advanced concepts. And that's what I'd like to start on with you guys today. So what does it take to beat today's games? First of all, I think it's very important to remember that any kind of learning in poker, whether it's in tournament poker or in another format, is a very different approach to learning than that which we take in most other subjects or in other sports. For example, if you're throwing a ball around with someone and you throw it too far to one side or above their head, you can very easily on the next throw, with a fairly simple mechanical adjustment, get a more accurate shot in. You can adjust immediately to the previous event and reasonably accurately correct for the error made. If you do this in poker, it's actually likely to lead you to a cascade of errors. For example, we might make a play which is perfectly fine. Overly simple example to make the point, we might reshove on someone with 15 bigs, late position versus late position with ace jack, something like that, run into ace king and bust out of the tournament and instantly regret our decision. This is a very common thing amongst beginners in the tournament scene. And to us veterans of the game, as I'm sure many of you guys would know, this is known as results-oriented thinking, and it can be very unhelpful for our progress, in fact. So whether it's because we run into the top of an opponent's range, or whether it's because we get sucked out on, whatever the reason may be, we might make a play that's perfectly correct, or that is in fact definitely optimal, and run afoul of circumstance and bust out, or we might make a play which is actually quite flawed and benefit from it. So if we pick up immediate feedback from the direct result of an individual hand without analyzing it further, we're going to draw all kinds of incorrect conclusions about what we need to do. We're going to, often in the case where we're trying to avoid a negative outcome, we're going to make quick adjustments which aren't necessarily founded on good logic and aren't necessarily thought through, in which case we're just going to be kind of bouncing around between one approach and another without really doing the work which is needed to understand what approach is best. So I recommend that we really need to overhaul our relationship to results. Of course, everybody wants results in the long term, but focusing on the immediate results of individual hands without due attention to the thought process, to the decision process, and reasoning it out is going to be pretty bad for our game. Nonetheless, it's very easy to just click buttons in online poker. They're right there, crying out to be clicked. Learning which ones to click, in what order, in what circumstance, and what plan to have for future streets, future eventualities is absolutely crucial in improving as a player. Of course, as we progress in terms of grinding out the MTTs and looking at getting in good volume, which is of course critical to long-term success and to any real financial returns, we're going to have to balance that with maintaining our ability to play thoughtfully and to think through situations, giving ourselves time to do that. So we've got to find that sweet spot between dollar per hour and return on investment per game, which comes as we master multi-tabling. But above all, what we need to beat the MTTs, which are still relatively soft, certainly much softer than the majority of cash games online, even as you progress up the stakes in the MTT scene, what we need to beat these games above anything else are just super strong fundamentals. When you get up to the higher stakes MTTs, certainly the non-super soft ones, the dailies, for example, the daily 109s, daily 215s, of course you're going to be facing much tougher opposition, and you're going to have to pull all the tricks out of the hat. You're going to have to face much smaller profit edges available as well in those games. But when you're talking about the small to mid stakes online scene, even the softer Sunday major, there's a very high ROI is still achievable simply by playing a very strong, very well developed, solid game of poker, and doing so extremely consistently. Now, that's not to say there is not room for more creative play, for thinking outside the box, and for turning over some of the conventions in the current game, and we will be talking about that as well. But it's not stage one. Stage one is mastering the fundamentals, and that's what this series is all about. So, what else do I want to talk to you about today? How to lay the groundwork for achieving this. These are just some of the concepts which I want to unpack and analyze and go into in depth with you guys during this series. Of course, before anything else, we need a very strong understanding of all the rules of the game and also our objectives within the game. What are we trying to achieve? Are we trying to scrape into the money? Are we going for gold and trying to do everything we can to get the first place and only focusing on that? Well, neither of those is the reality. Understanding the nature of the payout structure and what our goals should be as we progress deeper into the money is obviously one of many important things in terms of our overall objective. But I also think that just focusing on improving ourselves as players and improving how often we're playing on our A game as well is much more important than focusing on our financial goals. Now, hand strength and hand selection, obviously pretty important areas. Of course, the simple aspect of this is understanding absolute hand strength, understanding the rankings, and I'm sure all of you guys who are regular players are already past masters at this, but understanding relative hand strength, understanding how to put our opponents on a range and how to define that range as we progress across the streets is a much more delicate art, and of course something that we are all working on, certainly in our post-flop game, we're all working on all the time. Now, we're going to be looking into this in a lot more detail as well, and into how to plan from moment one, how to plan the course of the hand, how to plan for various different eventualities, various different runouts, different villain responses, how to plan with regard to different known villain tendencies as well. Something else I think is very important in terms of fundamentals is understanding the nature of automatic profit spots and implied profit spots, by which I mean spots where we can make an instant profit with a single action, and spots where a single action is not going to be profitable on its own but may well be so as part of a sequence of actions. So a simple example might be we opt to c-bet a dry flop where we've missed entirely, but our opening range connects quite well with that flop, and the villain's, say, defending range, assume villain defended big blind, for example, and villain's defending range does not really connect with that flop. We're usually going to be able to put in a single c-bet and expect for it to make an automatic return, an automatic profit for us as a single action, even if we're not planning to barrel almost any turn card. Whereas there are other spots where we're either not going to c-bet or we're going to c-bet with a plan to barrel or even triple barrel certain runouts in order to ensure that the bet becomes a profitable one as part of a whole line plan. So understanding what spots are auto profit and what spots are not is again crucial really to long-term success. So having not just a good sense of the meaning of equity value, but being able to assess how much equity value is available in a given spot. So if I were to play this hand exactly this way 1,000 times, how much profit would I make long term overall in this spot? Combined with the question of how that chip equity value relates to the nature of the beast, the nature of the variance inherent in MTT, because there are spots where we do want to pass up a chip equity edge, whether that is for ICM reasons, and I will be going into a lot more detail in another episode in terms of ICM, but also with regard to, well, subtler ICM effects, not the ones we'd associate with final table payout jumps or with bubble play, but just the ones that we'd associate as kind of in the background when we're progressing, say, in the money in a deep MTT. There are spots where we want to take a lower variance line, even if it's worth a little bit less in chip equity terms. Okay, so another thing I think we really want to hone in on, a very simple but very powerful mathematical tool, is getting our heads around the risk reward ratio, which is at the heart of direct odds and is in simple terms just saying I am risking X amount in order to win Y, and how often do I need this to work in order to turn an immediate profit. So this relates of course to the auto profit concept I was speaking about a moment ago. We're also going to be looking into a lot of depth at how best to play various positions, various seats, and how to play with and without position, and with and without, or with or without positional advantage, and with or without initiative. Because I think a pretty common mistake amongst regulars in the small to mid stakes, even higher, is overvaluing position, as in not being comfortable playing out of position, and overvaluing initiative, so being out of their comfort zone when playing without the initiative. We're looking at a host of adjustments as well in some of the more advanced items in this series. We're going to be looking at adjustments versus regulars, and we're going to be looking at leading ranges post-flop, for example, and areas such as this which are changing quite rapidly in the MTT scene at the moment. Finally then, in terms of the early development of our fundamentals, we really need to get a very strong grasp on why aggression is so important in poker. Why is it that open limping is rarely for the best? That said, I will actually later on be looking at some spots where we do want to make the adjustment of open limping. I know that sounds almost like anathema, but there are good reasons for it in certain cases. However, the first thing we want to do is iron it out almost completely from our game until we perhaps bring it back in for very specific reasons at a later stage. Okay, but why do beginners open limp so much? Why do people who are new to the game do that? What is the logic that is going on in their mind? Because there's always a reason for every action someone makes in a poker game, whether it's a facile reason like tilt or misclicking, or whether it's something which seems logical to the person at the time, but which once we analyze it still further is not. So I would argue that a lot of beginners open limp because it appears logical on the face of it if we don't understand that much about the dynamics of the game, that we would want to see a flop for as cheap as possible. We want to invest as little as possible for the perceived benefit of just getting to a flop. Now, the reasons why aggression is so fundamental to the game, of course, are many, but in simple terms, we would start off with things like it multiplies the ways in which we can win the pot, it builds a pot so that we can win more money post-flop, we can win a greater number of chips post-flop, with the edge that we should have post-flop, and more besides. So I'm going to be going into this concept in quite a bit more detail as well. Now, I just want to leave you today with one final thought, and that is to muse on this concept of the villain within every hero. By which I mean that before you can hope to crush at your stakes, you have to remove one very major obstacle to your own success, which is in fact the villain within you. So we are our own worst enemy on many occasions in MTT play, and if we're robbing ourselves of the opportunity to succeed by ignoring our leaks, by tilting, by getting into bad habits which we don't critically examine, or just by failing to progress and stagnating while those around us improve, we're going to be banjaxing our own opportunity to succeed, essentially. So we really have to eliminate the worst villain of all, the one within ourselves, before we can go on to succeed in these games. And that's what I'm going to be hoping to work on with you guys through this series. So guys, this was a little taster of what I hope to explore in a great deal more depth and with a lot of case studies, hand examples, which I will be pulling up from my own games, and that will begin on the 8th of June with the first installment, the first full installment of my series, Nailing the Fundamentals, and that's going to be called Nailing the Fundamentals, The Nature of the Beast. So I hope if you're looking to improve your game and you'd like a detailed primer of step-by-step actions which you can take to master the fundamentals of MTT poker, I hope you will join me on Monday the 8th. Until then, guys, all the best of luck in your own games.